What exactly makes people climb impossible mountains without ropes? Dive into underwater caves that may become their graves? Live among grizzly bears? Or spend decades obsessively chasing a truth that everyone else has long abandoned? For some, it's the thrill of adventure and the desire to feel truly alive while standing on the edge between life and death. For others, it's a desire for revenge and justice that doesn't fade even after decades. There are even those who are driven by a love that borders on true madness. But despite their different reasons, they all share one thing in common: an obsession so powerful that they are willing to risk everything for it. That is why today on Top 2 Day, we're looking at 10 disturbing documentaries about people who became consumed by an idea, a passion, or an obsession that took over their lives. Unfortunately, almost all of these stories end in tragedy. Yet the documentaries on today's list are emotional, brutal, and at the same time, beautiful. But before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's start with number 10. Number 10, The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, 2007. As always, let's begin with something a little less intense before moving on to darker and more disturbing documentaries. The King of Kong, A Fistful of Quarters, directed by Seth Gordon, tells the bizarre and surprisingly intense story of two men whose lives become consumed by the pursuit of a Donkey Kong world record. At first glance, it seems like a funny documentary about a completely harmless hobby. Two grown men competing for the world record in the classic arcade game Donkey Kong. But as the film goes on, it slowly transforms into something far stranger. A story about obsession, pride, and just how seriously some people can take things that most of us would consider trivial. At the center of the story is Steve Wiebe, an ordinary school teacher and family man who discovers that he has a real talent for arcade games. After achieving what appears to be a new world record in Donkey Kong, he suddenly finds himself at war with the reigning champion, Billy Mitchell. The documentary slowly reveals a strange and highly competitive subculture of professional gamers, where high scores are treated almost like Olympic records, and every point matters. The King of Kong is funny, bizarre, and at times surprisingly emotional. More importantly, it serves as a perfect reminder that people don't need mountains, money, or fame to become obsessed. Sometimes, all it takes is an old arcade machine and a number at the top of a scoreboard. Number 9. Project Grizzly, 1996. At first glance, Project Grizzly almost feels like a comedy. Directed by Peter Lynch, the documentary follows Troy Hurtubise, a Canadian inventor who becomes completely obsessed with one seemingly impossible goal: building a suit that would allow a human being to survive an attack by a grizzly bear. After a terrifying encounter with a grizzly years earlier, Troy dedicates nearly every aspect of his life to this project. He spends years designing increasingly bizarre prototypes, testing them on himself in some truly insane ways, including being hit by cars, thrown down hills, and slammed into trees. And that's exactly what makes this documentary so fascinating. What begins as an eccentric idea slowly turns into the portrait of a man entirely consumed by his obsession. The suit is no longer just a suit. It becomes his purpose, his identity, and perhaps even his reason for living. At times, Project Grizzly is genuinely funny. At others, it's surprisingly sad and even a little disturbing. You start asking yourself whether you're watching an inventor pursuing an impossible dream or a man who simply cannot let go of an idea that has taken over his entire life. One final fact makes Troy's story even more bittersweet. I only recently discovered that he passed away in 2018 after a tragic car accident in Ontario. Despite all of his bizarre inventions and seemingly impossible dreams, he never stopped building, creating, and chasing new ideas until the very end of his life. The documentary is incredibly easy to find on YouTube, and I highly recommend giving it a chance. Number 8. Fire of Love, 2022. Fire of Love tells the incredible true story of French volcanologists Katja and Maurice Kraft, a married couple who dedicated their entire lives to studying active volcanoes. Using rare archival footage shot by the crafts themselves and a poetic, French New Wave-inspired style, the documentary feels less like a traditional science film and more like a beautiful and melancholic love story. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, the couple traveled the world, standing dangerously close to erupting volcanoes in search of both scientific discoveries and breathtaking images. The film gradually explores the emotional and philosophical side of their obsession, asking why some people are willing to risk everything for the things they love. What makes Fire of Love so special is that it almost stops being a documentary about volcanoes altogether and becomes a love letter to Katya and Maurice themselves. The film constantly reminds us that they weren't chasing fame or danger for its own sake. They were simply 2 people who found each other through a shared obsession and spent their entire lives pursuing the thing they loved most. They understood the risks of their profession better than anyone. In fact, the couple chose not to have children because they knew that one day their passion for volcanoes might cost them their lives. As their obsession continues to push the boundaries of safety, the documentary explores the emotional depths of 2 people completely devoted to understanding the Earth's violent beauty, culminating in their final expedition to Mount Unzen in 1991, where they were ultimately claimed by the very force they had devoted their lives to studying. An incredibly beautiful and deeply moving documentary whose stunning visuals and haunting score will leave almost no one indifferent. And don't think I've spoiled anything here. The ending isn't what matters. What truly matters is the journey these 2 lovers walk together, hand in hand. Number 7. The Alpinist, 2021. Have you ever heard of Alex Honnold? Perhaps you've seen his incredible free solo climbs or watched the documentary Free Solo, where his achievements are explored in great detail. But today, we're not talking about him. Today, we're talking about a man who never chased fame, rarely appeared in the spotlight, and quietly accomplished things that many considered almost impossible. An extraordinary mountaineer who, despite remaining largely unknown to the public, deserved to stand alongside Alex Honnold among the greatest climbers of his generation. Marc-André Leclerc. The Alpinist tells the extraordinary and ultimately tragic story of a man who felt truly alive only in the mountains. Unlike most elite climbers, Marc avoided fame, sponsorships, and social media almost entirely. Some of his most incredible ascents were completed without anyone even knowing he was attempting them. He often climbed alone, without ropes, without cameras, and sometimes without even telling his friends where he was going. To him, a tent or even a stairwell was more than enough to call home. He also found a partner who shared his passion for climbing and understood the life he had chosen. In many ways, he was the complete opposite of modern celebrity climbers. He even tells the filmmakers that once cameras start following him, it no longer feels like a true solo climb. Perhaps that's what makes Marc-André Leclerc such a fascinating person. He wasn't climbing for fame, money, or records. He climbed because the mountains were the only place where he felt completely free. And that is exactly what this documentary explores: the philosophy, personality, and extraordinary life of one of the greatest climbers of his generation, while also allowing us to witness several breathtaking ascents that Marc permitted the filmmakers to capture on camera. It's a beautiful, inspiring, and heartbreaking documentary that stands proudly alongside Free Solo, and one that you definitely need to watch. Number 6. The Contestant, 2023. How far would you go for fame? Would you be willing to sit completely naked in a tiny apartment for more than a year, completely isolated from the outside world, surviving only on prizes won from magazine sweepstakes? Probably not. And honestly, who in their right mind would ever agree to something like that? Believe it or not, you've probably already heard about this man. Over the past few years, countless YouTubers and internet commentators have dissected his story in great detail. Directed by Claire Titley, The Contestant tells the unbelievable true story of Tomoaki Hamatsu, better known as Nasubi, a struggling Japanese comedian who agreed to participate in what he thought would be a simple television challenge. Instead, he became the unwitting star of one of the strangest and most disturbing reality shows ever created. At the height of its popularity, millions of people across Japan were following his bizarre ordeal. Years later, his story became so infamous that it eventually received its own documentary film, and even today, many bloggers are still talking about his case. In 1998, aspiring comedian Tomoaki Hamatsu answered an advertisement looking for contestants for a television challenge. Like many struggling entertainers, he dreamed of making it big and saw the opportunity as his chance to finally succeed. After arriving at the studio, he drew a challenge from a box and was told that he would have to live alone in a small apartment and survive entirely on prizes won from magazine sweepstakes until he had accumulated 1 million yen worth of winnings. Nasubi had no idea how long he would be there, and, even more disturbingly, he had no idea that his life was being broadcast live to millions of viewers across Japan. He believed everything was simply being recorded and would later be edited into a television program. He had no idea that at that very moment, people across the country were already watching his every move. Determined not to give up and convinced that this was his opportunity to prove himself, he kept going, day after day, for more than a year. The unimaginable physical and psychological ordeal that Nasubi went through is something you'll have to experience for yourself by watching this documentary. It also has to be said that the producer behind this experiment comes across as a genuinely despicable person. More importantly, the documentary doesn't just tell the story of what happened to Nasubi, it reveals the man behind the headlines. By the end of the film, he no longer feels like an internet legend or a bizarre piece of television history, but like a real human being who went through something genuinely unimaginable. The documentary examines the entire story in remarkable detail and is, quite possibly, the definitive work on the Nasubi case. Number 5. Dave's Not Coming Back, 2020. This documentary is fully available on YouTube. It is disturbing not only because of the story, but also because real footage is added in there. Directed by Jonah Malik, Dave's Not Coming Back tells the incredible and tragic true story of one of the most dangerous recovery missions ever attempted. The documentary follows Dave Shaw, an Australian deep cave diver who, during a record-breaking dive in South Africa's Boesmansgat sinkhole, accidentally discovered the body of Dion Dreyer, a diver who had disappeared more than 10 years earlier. Lying nearly 270 meters below the surface, the body had been remarkably well preserved by the cold water and extreme depth. Shaw soon became convinced that he had a moral obligation to bring Dion's body back to his family. Many experienced divers warned him that such an operation would be incredibly dangerous and perhaps simply not worth the risk, but Dave disagreed. Determined to bring the missing diver home, he was willing to risk everything to make it happen. What began as a chance discovery slowly turned into an obsession. He became determined to recover the body and return it to the diver's family, despite the enormous risks involved. Deep cave diving is often considered one of the most dangerous activities on Earth. There is no direct path to the surface. Visibility can disappear in seconds, and even the smallest mistake can be fatal. As the documentary progresses, you begin to realize that this is no longer just a recovery mission. It becomes a story about obsession, responsibility, and a man who simply refused to walk away from something he believed he had to finish. The film is incredibly tense because you constantly feel that everything could go wrong at any moment. Dave's Not Coming Back is both a thrilling documentary and a heartbreaking reminder that even the noblest obsessions can come with a high price. Number 4. Zoo. 2007. Some documentaries are disturbing because of violence, others because of tragedy. And then there are documentaries like Zoo, which are disturbing simply because they reveal parts of human behavior most of us would rather believe don't exist. Directed by Robinson DeVore, Zoo explores one of the most bizarre and controversial real-life cases in recent history, often referred to as the Enumclaw incident. The film follows a small group of men who lived seemingly ordinary lives while secretly engaging in behavior so taboo that many people still struggle to believe the story is real. If you're still wondering what exactly they were doing, it involved horses. One of the participants ultimately died as a result, and honestly, I don't think any more details are necessary. Rather than presenting the case as a traditional true crime documentary, Zoo takes a slow, almost hypnotic approach, relying heavily on atmospheric visuals, interviews, and narration. It explores a highly divisive subject from an almost amoral perspective. It's up to you, the viewer, to decide how you feel about the men's behavior. Is it wrong? And within the broader context of human behavior throughout history, how wrong is it, really? There is a constant sense of tension and unease, and even the interviews feel distant, with subjects often avoiding direct eye contact, adding to the overall discomfort. It isn't an easy watch. In fact, at times it can feel slow and even a little inaccessible, but perhaps that's exactly why the documentary remains so memorable. Aside from the ending, there are no particularly graphic or shocking scenes in the film. Yet the way it's shot, the detached style of storytelling, and, most importantly, the subject the participants are discussing, makes Zoo one of the most uncomfortable documentaries you're ever likely to see. Number 3. Sick. The Life and Death of Bob Flanagan, Supermasochist, 1997. If I'm destined to suffer anyway, can I choose how I suffer? That question lies at the heart of one of the strangest and most uncomfortable documentaries I've ever seen. Also, this is probably the only film on today's list that I genuinely cannot recommend to anyone. It contains an enormous amount of explicit adult material and scenes that are difficult to find even on certain orange-colored websites. But beneath all the shock value lies something much sadder and far more fascinating. Directed by Kirby Dick, the documentary follows artist and performer Bob Flanagan, a man living with cystic fibrosis, a painful genetic disease that doctors never expected him to survive for very long. Instead of running from pain, Bob embraced it. He transformed suffering into art, turned masochism into a philosophy, and spent his final years trying to reclaim control over a body that was slowly killing him. As the film progresses, however, it becomes increasingly heartbreaking. You slowly realize that all of these shocking performances and all of this self-inflicted pain may have been Bob's way of fighting back against a disease that had controlled his entire life. And that's the most disturbing part of this documentary. Not the explicit scenes and not the things Bob does to his body, but the realization that behind all of it was a man desperately trying to reclaim control over his own suffering. This is a very powerful and surprisingly overlooked documentary that few people have seen. By the end, it becomes genuinely heartbreaking as we witness the disease slowly taking over and Bob's long battle with it approaching its inevitable end. If you're one of those who has actually seen this documentary, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. As difficult as it is to watch, it's hard to imagine anyone remaining completely unaffected by it. That said, because of the amount of explicit adult content, think twice before trying to track it down. Number 2. Grizzly Man, 2005. Directed by Werner Herzog, a filmmaker who has already appeared on this channel when we talked about his legendary and chaotic relationship with Klaus Kinski in Aguirre, The Wrath of God, we are now looking at perhaps his most famous work. Grizzly Man tells one of the most fascinating and tragic stories of human obsession ever put on film. The documentary follows Timothy Treadwell, an environmental activist who spent 13 summers living among wild grizzly bears in Alaska. Over the years, Timothy became convinced that he had formed a special bond with these animals. He spoke to them as if they were old friends, gave many of them names, and gradually began to see himself not just as an observer, but as their protector. Unfortunately, one day his luck ran out, leading to a deeply tragic end for both him and his girlfriend. Herzog's documentary ultimately tries to answer a difficult question. What was really driving Timothy? Was he, in his own way, a madman who had created a fantasy in his head? Or was this simply the purest form of love and devotion imaginable? At the same time, Grizzly Man is also a tragic illustration of just how fundamentally human beings can misunderstand nature. Timothy believed that he had crossed an invisible boundary and become part of the bear's world. Herzog, however, seems to suggest the exact opposite. Nature doesn't love us, doesn't hate us, and doesn't recognize us as friends. It simply exists, completely indifferent to our dreams and illusions. One of the most unforgettable moments in the film comes when Herzog sits down with Timothy's closest friend and listens to the audio recording of Timothy's final moments. An audio recording the audience never hears. After taking off the headphones, Herzog quietly tells her that she should destroy the tape and never listen to it. If something is horrifying enough to visibly shake Werner Herzog and make him insist that it should never be included in the film, we can only imagine how terrifying those final moments truly were. Herzog never turns Timothy Treadwell into either a hero or a fool. He shows all sides of him. A deeply troubled, almost childishly naive man who nevertheless genuinely loved grizzly bears and was willing to die for them. I was also deeply moved by the fact that his girlfriend never abandoned him and stayed by his side until the very end. Lastly, I wanted to add that although the original audio recording of Timothy's final moments has never been publicly released, it is possible to find an edited 2-minute recording online that many people believe sounds disturbingly authentic. Perhaps it was leaked by someone who had access to the tapes, as park rangers reportedly had copies of the recording as well. Or maybe it is just well-made fake. If you've heard this recording, let me know what you think. Do you believe it's real, or just another internet hoax? Number 1. The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On, 1987. After watching the act of killing and its incredible companion piece, The Look of Silence, I genuinely believe that I would never find another documentary about war crimes and human cruelty that could affect me in quite the same way. I was very, very wrong. Because at that point, I still hadn't seen The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On. Directed by Kazuo Hara, this documentary follows Kinzo Okuzaki, a former Japanese soldier who becomes completely obsessed with uncovering the truth behind the mysterious executions of 2 soldiers from his unit during World War II. But calling him an investigator would be an understatement. Okuzaki is a force of nature. To better understand what kind of person Kinzo Okuzaki was, you should know that in 1969, he attempted to attack Emperor Hirohito himself, using a slingshot and metal ball bearings during a public event. He didn't kill or even injure the emperor, but he was arrested and sent to prison. That's the kind of man we're dealing with. He is absolutely relentless in his pursuit of truth and justice. He doesn't simply ask questions or observe from a distance. He confronts people directly, accuses them of lying, and is more than willing to fight, both verbally and physically, for his beliefs. For example, he visits one of the former officers who allegedly gave the order and tells him directly that he will either confess or Okuzaki will beat the confession out of him. Moments later, he actually starts beating the shit out of the man. And throughout the documentary, we watch this obsession drive him further and further, turning his search for answers into something deeply unsettling. As viewers, we witness the tragedy of a man and can't help but sympathize with him. Yet, at the same time, we understand that his obsession is slowly consuming him. In many ways, Okuzaki reminded me of Hiro Onoda, the Japanese soldier who continued fighting World War II for nearly 30 years after it had already ended. There is something uniquely Japanese about both of these men. A level of dedication and obsession so extreme that it's almost impossible to imagine anywhere else. The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On forces us to ask difficult questions about war, responsibility, and what happens when a person becomes completely consumed by an obsession that refuses to let them move forward. If you've seen the act of killing, and that film affected you as deeply as it affected me, then The Emperor's Naked Army Marches On will leave no less of an impression on you, and perhaps an even greater one. An incredibly unique film, truly one of a kind. If you get the chance, you should absolutely watch it. Alright, looks like that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even found something new to watch. At the end, I want to say that yes, I understand that some of these picks may not be disturbing in the way we're used to on this channel. However, I genuinely believe that every film on today's list deserves its place because each of them tells a fascinating and, in many ways, deeply unsettling story about human obsession. Now it's your turn. Which documentary on today's list affected you the most? And do you know any other documentaries about people consumed by an idea, a passion, or an obsession? Share your picks in the comments below. I read every comment and I'm always looking for new recommendations. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. More disturbing movies and documentaries are already on the way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.